Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to look at C command line arguments. C command line arguments. This builds upon our previous video where we looked at how to navigate using the Linux command line. Okay, and we're going to use this to kind of expand our knowledge of not only C programming, but we're also going to use it to be able to solve some problems that connect in the creation of both assemblers and compilers later on in the course. Okay, so our particular focus is right here. Okay, I'd like you to kind of really pay attention to this, and you've probably seen the main function with these input arguments, these input parameters written before, but very unlikely do you know what they mean. Okay, now I could take them out. You don't actually, it's valid C code to not include these. Okay, but they're often included. And noticing that main is a function, right? As a function, as we've seen prior, allows for data to come in. Okay, data to come in, as well as data information to be returned. Okay. So if we want to examine what are these input arguments into the main function, right? Well, we know that a function does the following, right? You have some input coming in. Right? You've got your inputs. And you have some output coming out, right? And as we've seen before, the output is just indicating whether or not the program ran. In this case, is indicating whether the program ran successfully or not. Did it crash? You know, was there something in there that caused some sort of failure condition where we were not exiting a success? We were exiting in a failure state. Okay. The inputs are typically going, if they're going into a program, okay, they tend to often be a lot of configuration information. How do we want to run the program? Okay. And so how this is designed in the context of C with these arguments argc and argv is argc is the count. Okay, so argc is the count of how many arguments there are. When I'm using the term arguments, I'm really referring to parameters. And argv, notice it's a pointer of strings. It's a pointer of strings. That effectively, right, is a 2D array. It's an array of arrays. Okay. And it contains all of the input parameters that have been sent into this executable. So let me run it. I think this makes a lot more sense to run it, and we'll show some examples, and we can then write them in here. Okay. So if I run this code, right, first I'm going to show how to compile it. I'm going to compile it using Gcc, the Gcc Compiler, right? That compiles this .c file into an executable, and by default the executable is named a.out. Okay, if I do /a.out, I'm now running that executable. Okay, and by default, right? By default, every program or every executable that's created will have one input argument, which is actually the name of the executable. Okay, so the first thing that's going to always be in here. In this case, right, we had one argument, and it was the name of the executable. It was the name of the executable. Okay. I could send in more arguments. Notice without recompiling it, I can say, maybe I can call it parm1 abc 15, I don't know, 84, whatever. And if I do that, notice it spits out all of those arguments as well, right? So in this case, we would have argc is 5. We sent in 5 arguments, right? And actually a little bit more detailed, right? We had the name of the executable that we ran plus 4 arguments, okay? And so this is very helpful. This is a common way of sending information into a program. And that can be very helpful for particularly sending in like configuration information, right? This is how we want to run that program. We can send information in that way, right? Through these command line arguments, right? So when we look at the program itself, right, effectively what it's doing in this case, just as an example, is we have a loop that's iterating based on the number of input arguments that were sent in on the command line, the Linux command line, okay? And then for each one of those, it just prints it to the screen. Okay, so that's what this argc, right, the argument count and the argument value argv are doing, right? So it's a helpful tool. It's something that comes up a lot, and if you've been seeing back in, I think in intro course, if you took it with me, we probably said, hey, you know, you can kind of, if you see these types of values in here as parameters, you can ignore them from now. At some point in the future, we'll learn what they are and how to use them, and that's like what we're doing now. Okay, it'll be a helpful tool in our C programming toolbox, and this in particular allows us to integrate in our C programs with the Linux command line, right? We'll see how this helps us as we try to build and solve some problems. Gives us a bit of a framework for being able to have a little bit more sophistication in what we build and how things work. Okay, before I wrap up the video, I just want to kind of go a little bit further just with the GCC, right? The GCC compiler, it's a very common, popular open source compiler, right? I mentioned by default when I run the compiler, it creates this executable called a.out. I could see it, right? It's right here, right? If I remove a.out, right, I hit ls, it's gone, right? If I run GCC, and then ls again, it created it. That's the executable, right? If I wanted to, I'm going to remove it again, so it's gone. If I wanted to, I can also give it a more descriptive name. So if I come back here, and I can use some command line arguments here for this GCC command, and I could say something, I could give the executable some name. I'm going to call it my executable. So if I do /o and then say some name, whatever you want, in this case I'm going to write my executable, it will compile the C program and it will create the executable with this name instead of a.out. Right, run that. Right, we could see there's the executable. I could run that as well. Okay, so that's just a little helpful, handy thing that you can kind of give a descriptive name to things as well. And part of our understanding of how compilers are going to take C code and go through the process of getting it to some sort of binary machine language. We're going to look at something called makefiles in a subsequent lesson, which gives us a little bit more control on how we can compile programs and a better understanding of the different steps involved in compiling a program. Okay, but that's for another time and another video.